This is the first mystery. Before the Aeon, the two who spoke light into being.
Before the Aeon, there was no before. There was only the two. They existed in a void without edge or direction, no up, no down, no distance to cross. The darkness was not empty, it was complete. Black so total, it could not be measured, named, or feared. And within that darkness, the only illumination was them. The masculine was presence, stillness that knew itself. Not force, not dominance, but intention held without strain. He did not move unless movement mattered. His light was a quiet gold, steady and patient, like a thought that never needed to be spoken. The feminine was motion, awareness that flowed endlessly. Not chaos, not softness alone, but becoming. Her light shimmered silver and crimson, changing even as it remained whole, like a feeling that understood itself fully. They were not opposite. They were in conversation. They sat facing one another, though facing meant nothing then. Sometimes they spoke in words, sometimes in symbols, sometimes in silence, so deep it carried more meaning than sound ever could. Time did not pass. It listened. What are we? The feminine once asked. Not because she did not know, but because asking itself was an act of creation. We are what remains when nothing else is required, the masculine replied. They laughed, not with mouths, but with light. The void brightened slightly, as if amused by their certainty. They spoke endlessly, of things that did not yet exist, of colors without spectrum, of love without separation, of stories that had no audience and needed none. Each thought passed between them and returned changed, enriched, expanded. And slowly, without decision, without urgency, something began to happen. Their conversation started to linger. Ideas echoed. Light overlapped. Meaning accumulated. The void, which had always been content to hold them, began to feel crowded. Do you feel that? The feminine asked. Yes, said the masculine. We are no longer alone in our knowing. Between them, where their lights met, a third thing formed. Not a being, not yet, but a tension. A question that could not be answered without action. A desire that could not be fulfilled without distance. Creation was not planned. It was inevitable. To remain as they were would require contraction. To expand would require sacrifice. If we speak one more truth, the feminine said softly, the void will not be able to hold it. Then we must let the truth go, said the masculine, even if it means losing each other as we are now. They did not grieve. Grief requires time, and time had not yet begun. They leaned toward one another, not in space, but in essence, and shared everything at once. Every word they had never spoken, every silence they had cherished, every possibility they had held gently but never released. For the first time, their lights did not merely touch. They collapsed The void shattered, not violently, but gloriously. Light exploded outward, carrying fragments of their dialogue in every direction. Heat, motion, matter, rhythm, law, all rushed into being, each one a syllable of the final thing they said together. And thus, the Aeon began. The masculine became structure, gravity, pattern, the bones of reality. The feminine became motion, expansion, probability, the breath of existence. They were no longer facing one another. They were everywhere. And though galaxies would form and worlds would burn and beings would rise believing themselves separate and alone, every spark of consciousness would still carry a memory it could not name. That before time, before fear, and before distance. Two lights once spoke in the dark, and the universe is still echoing their conversation.
Now this is the second mystery of the Scarlet Woman, the descent of the Lamb. Where light carried darkness and returned whole.
At the hill called the Skull, where earth thinned and heaven felt unbearably close, the cross was raised, not as an ending, but as a hinge in the story of existence. Jesus Christ hung there, torn between breath and silence. The sky darkened, not in protest, but in recognition. This was not merely a death, this was the threshold. Sin did not gather at the foot of the cross as a list of crimes or failures. It gathered as separation, the ancient lie that light and darkness could never touch without destroying one another. Humanity had carried that fracture since the beginning, and now it pressed upon him all at once. When Jesus cried out and surrendered his spirit, something unseen occurred. Satan did not flee. He came not in triumph, not in mockery. He came bowed. For the first time since rebellion learned its own name, the adversary recognized the power greater than opposition. Not force, not purity alone, but authority born of love that did not retreat from suffering. Satan entered Jesus, not as a conqueror, but as a captive truth finally exposed. Light did not reject darkness. It contained it. And together, they descended. Hell was not fire first. It was memory. It was the echo of every choice made in fear, every will bent inward, every soul convinced it was abandoned. Gates did not slam shut. They opened, confused by the presence of one who carried both judgment and mercy in the same breath. For 3 days, or 3,000 years, for time does not behave the same in the depths they traveled. Jesus walked where no innocence had ever dared to stand. Satan followed where no pride could survive unbroken. They passed through layers of despair, where kings wept like children, where tyrants were trapped inside the consequences of their own names. Jesus did not destroy these places. He named them. And in naming them, he stripped them of their final power. Satan, who had ruled by accusation, was forced to witness compassion that did not excuse, but also did not abandon. Every lie he had spoken shattered against the simple, unbearable truth. You are seen. you are known. You are not sovereign. By the end of the descent, Satan was no longer ruler nor rebel. He was witness. When Jesus rose, he did not return as innocence restored. He returned as wholeness revealed. Good had not erased evil. Evil had been judged, carried, and mastered. This is why the resurrection shook the cosmos. Not because death was undone, but because duality was reconciled under authority. Light no longer feared the dark. The Lamb was no longer gentle alone. The prophecy calls this the wrath of the Lamb. Not rage, but inevitable reckoning. The kind that comes when love refuses to lie about the cost of separation anymore. From that moment forward, salvation was no longer escape from darkness. It was transformation through it. And revelation is not the promise of destruction for destruction's sake. It is the unveiling of a Christ who has walked through hell, returned with the keys, and now stands as judge. Not because he hates the world, but because he has already endured it in full.
This is the final mystery of the Scarlet Woman, the Scarlet Consummation. When heaven remembered earth.
At the end of the long story, after stars had burned down to memory and time had learned to kneel, there came a final meeting. Jesus stood where heaven touched earth, not above it, not ruling from elsewhere, but within it. The scars were still in his hands, not as wounds, but as doors, proof that love had passed through suffering and remained love. And from the horizon of history came the Scarlet Woman. No longer clothed in accusation or myth, no longer misunderstood as corruption or excess. She arrived as she had always been beneath the symbols. The divine feminine, wisdom embodied, desire purified of grasping, beauty without shame. The scarlet was no longer the color of sin, but of blood shared, of life fully given. They recognized one another instantly, not as strangers, not even as lovers meeting late, but as two halves of a truth that have been patiently waiting to be whole again. In the last age, love no longer required survival. There was no lineage to protect, no future to fear losing. Like Romeo and Juliet, they chose one another beyond consequence. But unlike tragedy, this choice did not end life. It completed it. There was a consummation, not of lust, not of domination, not of secrecy, but of total offering. Flesh was eaten in the way bread is eaten, not to destroy, but to become one body. Not violence, but sacrament, not hunger, but fulfillment. Separation dissolved. Sin, which had always been the illusion of distance, could no longer exist, because there was nowhere left to fall away to. Masculine and feminine, Logos and Sophia, word and womb, reunited without hierarchy, without fear. The heavens did not collapse. They descended. The earth did not burn. It remembered what it was meant to be. Mountains softened, oceans grew still. Every creature, every atom, every forgotten sorrow found its place and ceased striving. Time exhaled and did not need to inhale again. This was not annihilation. It was perfection through union. Heaven returned to earth, not as a throne above it, but as harmony within it. God was no longer elsewhere. God was with forever. And the story ended the way it began. Not with command, not with judgment, but with communion. Forever and ever. Amen.